Whoops, I almost hit the end stream button. Wrong button. Welcome, everybody. Back to another Organics Q&A. I am Chad Westport. We've got Tad Hussey in the house, as always, from KIS Organics. How you doing today?
I'm good. I'm looking forward to this one. I know we were a little scattered getting started, but I think it's going to be a good show. Yeah.
And I was a little bit late getting things up, so I apologize to people if you're catching this on the replay. I've been busy working on doing some editing, so you'll see the fruits of my labor soon enough. But this didn't get up as fast as I wanted to. I don't know where I was going with that because we are still a little scatterbrained, but I did want to kind of mention a video that you put out on the KIS Organics channel. The other week. You made a video all about dry amendments, and okay. I watched it. I enjoyed it. Can you give people who might not have caught that a little overview of what you did there?
Yeah, I went down to our farm and I just grabbed every amendment that we had and threw them all up. Just made little dishes of all of them, and then I just went through and just talked about them based on what they were, kind of what the NPK might be in them, what the value of using them might be, and talking about, because when we talk about organic fertilizers, all the products that you see are pretty much made from the ones that I was talking about. And there's a few things that I didn't have, like I don't have any guanos, and that's intentional, but we could talk about something like guanos. But I probably had like 95% of what you find on the organic gardening side, and even some of the stuff you might use as a non-organic gardener. I
liked it because you presented a few different options for different sources or different nutrients. Like nitrogen, you presented a wide array of things that people can choose to use. So that was helpful. And I do want to point out too, this was on the KIS Organics channel. So if you're subscribed to the KIS Organics YouTube channel, sorry if it's a little bit of a repeat, well worth it. But if you guys are only subscribed to the Chad Westport YouTube channel, go over there, subscribe, check out that video. And also, in between the weeks where you don't see us here on Tuesdays, you've got something cooking over there too, Tad. What's going on?
Yeah, so Brandon and I decided we're going to fill the weeks that you and I are not doing the live, and so we're gonna this hour we're just gonna block out, and if people are interested and enjoy it, we'll keep it going. And Brandon Hudson is the agronomist at KIS, and so yeah, we have a lot to talk about. He's been growing for like over 40 years now, I think, and so he's just got a ton of information, and so it's great. I was actually going to ask you, though, at the beginning of this, you talked about editing, and I saw you just threw up something with Westport University. Do you want to talk a little about that? I need to fix my camera. It keeps blurring. It's driving me nuts. So
yeah. Talk about that Westport for a second. University. That's actually exactly what I was working on editing, is the new ones coming out Thursday. I'm going to try to I am going to post them weekly, typically on Thursdays. And that's kind of where I'm combining all of my loves of like music and video and editing and cannabis and research and knowledge and helping people. So I'm kind of going back and really trying to give a new grower a solid foundation, a good foundation to build off of, but also for people who have been growing for a few years and they may be doing it well. A lot of people know what to do and when to do, but they don't necessarily understand the why behind what they're doing. So that's what people who have, if you've already been growing, these may help you understand some of the why behind the success you're having by doing it the way you're doing. And that's always beneficial, man. I'm a huge why person.
For sure. Yeah, definitely. Do you want to tease what the next video might be about, or is that private? We haven't talked about this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're talking about, and this is something that I'm sure you see in a wide array of, is how many plants should you really be putting into your tent? Like, what density is really kind of appropriate, and what are some of the limiting factors, or what are some of the negative consequences, but also how can you pull it off? Because as you've seen commercially, man, those things are packed pretty dense, but it takes
Yeah.
work. So yeah, I'm gonna cover some of that on Thursday.
I remember when I first started growing, I would try to fit as many plants as I could into there. I'd have pots sitting on top of pots, just trying to get as many plants in there, thinking that that was the best way to get the best yield. And because I wanted to grow all these different genetics, you know, you're like, oh, I can't not grow, you know, SC99 that I got a cut of here. I got to throw it in there.
Right.
So that was the challenge for me. And I've since kind of backed off that and realized like sometimes less is more. And it's really about canopy, not about number of plants necessarily.
It is. And there was a point where I just had to A and B it for myself. Again, going on density and number of plants versus maybe a little bit more space, a little less shade, a little less other things. And then you compare the two yields and surprising results. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that one. So that's going to be on the Chad Westport YouTube channel. So if you guys are subscribed here, and if you're watching from KIS Organics today, come on over and subscribe. But if you're on my channel, go on over to KIS Organics YouTube channel so you can catch those in between weeklies live shows. Same time, 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time.
Yes, same time. Cool. Everything's the same. You brought up the why. I kind of wanted to transition into this topic that you and I talked about, which was water. We were talking about watering before the show started. And I have a wonderful why comment about watering. And I was actually thinking about, because I was watering my plants today, and I was thinking about making a video about this again, because I say this rather frequently, but it's one of the coolest things that my botany professor, Don Marshall, taught me. And it's that plants that are overwatered and plants that are underwatered are going to display the exact same visual symptoms in terms of like nutrient deficiencies. And the reason why is because in both cases, well, do you know the reason? I think we've talked about it. Do you remember?
Yes. FRD are the first initials of the 3 words. Fine root hair death. That's 4 words.
Okay. I was the F.
I hyphenated it.
Yes.
Fine root hair hairs.
Death. Yes. Root hairs, a lot of times what people confuse for mycorrhizal fungi, those little tiny white hairs are where all the nutrient exchange is happening. And so if you overwater, you're killing root hairs. If you underwater, you're killing root hairs. And so you can't always tell from a picture if someone's over or underwatering. And in my most recent run here, in my room, I'm in beds. I underwatered after transplant, and I started to see some symptoms like interveinal necrosis. That's where in between the veins on the leaves, you would start things would start to yellow and die, and then also a little bit of what people call tip burn, where essentially right at the tip of the leaf there, it was starting to yellow, and I couldn't figure it out. And I realized that I had just underestimated how much water I was putting into the beds as I was rushing around and doing things. And so I had to slow down, water much heavier. And that's something Chad and I were talking about, because we want to stay like you have a blue mat moisture meter, and we say 80 to 100 MBAR is sort of the range, by 120 you'd be watering. And I was saying, well, let's water a little earlier and keep it a little bit wetter. Because I think in my case, I was underwatering. I know the initial thought for like growers is to overwater, and it's really when you water too frequently at low doses, that's how you kill a plant. You're never going to kill a plant with one massive overwatering at once, as long as the water can drain out. And they're not just sitting in water. You can't kill a plant that way. But if you're constantly watering, like too many frequency of doses of watering applications, then you can overwater. So I don't know. That's just interesting why that I thought I think of all the time. Every time I water is I'm thinking about root hairs.
Well, that's good, because this is how the kind of topic came up. We were talking about it because I'm growing the no joke with the custom soil in the 4x4 behind me, and I'm in larger pots. I am using that Blue Mott tensiometer, so it tells me the MBARs of the amount of water in the soil, but in the larger pots, the volume of water I've been giving it to satisfy that MBAR reading has been lower than what I would imagine would actually get to the very bottom of this large container. And on some of the new growth, I am noticing just a little bit of tip burn, which to me is, sometimes when you're feeding, you want to find the edge and then just come back a little bit. Right now, that little tip burn is telling me, it's like, oh, okay, you found like where it's at. And I'm assuming that's because the root tips are going into that drier soil because, again, the volume I'm giving it hasn't been making it down. And my concern was if I give it enough water to actually get all the way to the bottom, maybe get a 5% or even less runoff from that, my M bars are going to drop down very low, lower than where you would typically want to see it. So that's kind of how we got onto the watering discussion. And I think the kind of the solution we got to that was, go ahead and kind of probably double up the water that I was actually giving in that volume because I'm measuring everything out. And then it's going to rebound as far as drying, probably find like an equalization. Is that kind of true between the lower and the upper to keep my M bar rating in check?
Yeah, so I like to do something when I'm watering in containers, even in beds, called a pulse watering technique. I don't know where I heard it's a horticulture term. And essentially what you're doing, and you probably already do this naturally, most people probably do, is you want to give that first, you have all your, let's say you have 10 plants in a row, all in a line. You would give that first plant a little bit of water, let's say 2 cups of water, and then go on to the next plant and give it, 2 cups or 2 seconds with your hose. And then you go to the next plant, you go all the way down to the end, you go back to the first plant. Well, assuming the soil wasn't like really, really dried out and hydrophobic and the water's just not rushing through, assuming there's a little bit of water in there, then you just, you go back to that first plant and give it a little more water and you go all the way down again. And I do the same thing in a bed because I've got 6 plants in each bed. And that's just because of plant counts. That's why I went with 12 total plants. And I'll hit each plant and then I'll go to the next bed and I'll hit each plant and then I'll come back and check. Am I getting any water movement through all the way through? Because I want to make sure I'm thoroughly soaking it. So like my Blue Mat moisture meter, I think it was reading 17 when I was done watering today on there. So the soil was fully saturated, but I know that I have the ability for that soil to drain out. And then, we're finding that too, though. Like you can go a little bit wetter, 60 to 80. I was talking to Chad today about saying, hey, rather than starting to water at 120, let's start watering at 100. And then make sure that a little bit of water is coming out the bottom that's thoroughly saturating the pot. Because I would rather leach some nutrients than underwater. And then maybe you can go another 12, 24 hours between watering events, which would allow you to get a little bit more of that dry down too.
Yeah, because right now it's at every 48 hours, but at the same time, I've been letting it get up to 120. So, and I've been judging it. I'm going to switch my pots because with those, you really just kind of leave them in the soil. Don't necessarily plug it in, check, plug it in, check.
Yeah.
Plug it in, check. So I'm going to take it from the largest plant. That was the largest plant at the time. And now they've all kind of caught up as far as like foliage. So they're probably equal, but I want to move it from the one that I thought was drinking the most to one that I was probably assuming was drinking the least, and then kind of find my average. Been able to kind of eyeball or use a little bit of intuition there as far as which one needed the waters based off of that M bar in the larger plant. But all right, going too far down that road.
Well, one last comment on irrigation is we have to think about when there is water in the soil, when the moisture is higher, you have more nutrients in solution, which makes it easier for the plant to access nutrients too. And then also on the flip side, if you overwater, you could open yourself up to more pathogens like fusarium and some of the soil-borne pathogens that are sort of ubiquitous in our environment.
Hopefully not. Kind of speak. Hopefully not. We'll see. Again, I am recording this also. Everybody will be able to see this. This is that grow where I'm just kind of really recording all my parameters, which again is why I'm measuring my water down to the milliliters every time I water, keeping how long in between watering cycles and the M bars it's at when I've actually watered it. So trying to give you guys everything you need to get the same results using the custom soil mix from KIS Organics and the Twin Peaks genetics. So the video will be coming out. You guys will see more about what we're talking about here. But you did mention just a second ago kind of nutrient availability. And this is one thing that, you know, a question I get sometimes. Almost Green Thumb says, hey, y'all, on 11, 12 week flower time, when would your last top dress be? About week 8. And that's about 3-4 weeks before he's ready to harvest. That's kind of in the window I typically aim for, but what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends. So if the soil doesn't have enough nutrients to make it the full cycle, as in you need to supplement, or you're doing
like let's assume
feedings.
Let's assume it's a small container, and that's why they would need to.
Yeah, or we could say they're doing, and I'm assuming these are dry. This is a dry amendment fertilizer. We're not talking about like a liquid bottled organic bottled nutrient or like a fish hydrolysate. So, yeah, I think in that case, yes, because I figure 10 to 14 days typically for nutrients to, and again, it's going to depend on how much moisture is in the soil, how much biological activity, the particle size plays a huge role, like how finely ground is the nutrient that you're adding. But in general, I think that's a good rule, because that puts you 4 weeks out. So hopefully you can make it the full cycle on something like that.
And that was an excellent point that you brought up there. One thing that I did enjoy about the dry amendment video that you put out a couple weeks ago on your own channel was, the granule size. That makes a big difference in availability. Sometimes we don't think, or, we'll just pick it up from the store and assume that's what it is. So I'm glad that you did mention that. It's one of those little in between the line type of things. And then here's I had a couple of gypsum questions actually coming up, but Silent Truth has been using the Espoma pelletized gypsum, not a lot, maybe 2 tablespoons per 5-gallon pot. Now, the gypsum, would he be using that to regulate pH, or why would he potentially be wanting to add that in there?
So the reasons to use gypsum, also known as calcium sulfate, is for calcium and sulfur. So calcium, really, really important for a bunch of plant physiological processes, sulfur as well. The nice thing about gypsum, calcium sulfate, is that the calcium and the sulfur sort of balance each other out. And so that you don't get a big change in pH when you add it. The other nice thing about it is the solubility of it is quite low. And this is something I learned from Bryant Mason, the soil doctor, and from Steve Solomon, who wrote The Intelligent Gardener. And so it's one of those amendments that's it's hard to get yourself in trouble with. You can probably go a little heavier and be okay. It's a very safe way to get calcium and sulfur. And they're both, obviously, like I said, really important part of plant processes.
Awesome. Okay, and the question that we had up here related to this, and this is actually from our friend Paul. He had typed this into the comments on the last episode we did together. I always say, if anybody's watching the replay and you do have a question about the organic cannabis gardening, just type it into the comments, and we'll try to get to it on the show. So this was one from Paul. But I think you described it well there. And then he asked kind of typical dosage, and Silent Truth goes back to the 2 tablespoons per 5-gallon pot. Is that sound a little bit reasonable?
I mean, it's perfectly reasonable. I think you could go higher. I've gone as high as a cup per cubic foot, which a cubic foot is 7.5 gallons. So that would be what, 2/3 or 3/4 range of a cup for 5 gallons, 2/3 of a cup. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's in a 5-gallon pot. So that's significantly more than 2 tablespoons. And yet I feel like that's a pretty safe thing. But it depends too. Like, are you adding a bunch of other calcium amendments to the mix too? Are you adding a bunch of lime? What's your pH at? Those are all things you just kind of want to think about when you're formulating or the mix or deciding to add something. I always want to think about, like, why am I adding this tea? Why am I adding this fertilizer? That's that why that's so important, because if you already have sufficiency in calcium and sulfur, then adding it isn't going to do you any good, and it may limit the uptake of other cations like magnesium and potassium, for example.
So when you talk about kind of like antagonistic effects of some of these nutrients, my brain goes to Mulder's chart, which kind of points it out. Now, is there a like simplified text version of Mulder's chart instead of a bunch of confusing arrows that link to like everything? Is there a better source of knowledge or you can extract from that?
I haven't seen one, but I don't get too hung up on that. I think sufficiency of nutrient is more important than antagonism of nutrients. So making sure you have enough of something is more important than whether or not it's antagonistic to something else. So if I do have, let's say, way too much calcium, really at that point, what you need to do is you actually need to add more magnesium and more potassium to sort of balance it out at that point. So that's kind of what you use Mulder's chart for, is to sort of figure out where certain nutrients may limit others, and then just kind of use that to determine where to go next in terms of what you may need to add, assuming you can't flush that nutrient out.
Yeah, we just cracked the cow mag mystery, everybody. No, just jokes. We do have some serious questions, and I wanted to put this one up. I thought it was kind of cool. He's viewing from Denmark right now.
Hey, that is cool.
Yeah. He said the question is do you have to adjust pH when running organics biotabs program? Are you familiar with the biotabs? I have not heard that one yet.
I haven't, but I have heard this concept that pH doesn't matter in organics. And I almost want to I've talked about, joked around about making a shirt or a hat that says pH matters. So it's kind of like one of those things that's a little bit of a confusing topic, because in organics, you have so much better buffering capacity of pH. So like you could probably throw a bunch of stuff in a soil mix and it may come out to a range that the plant can still grow in. Let's say 6.4 to 7.3, which is a pretty wide range in organics, especially because pH is logarithmic. So
yeah,
if we want to talk about optimizing pH, though, making it easier for the plant to uptake nutrients, then yes, pH absolutely matters. So yeah, you can grow a plant at 5.5, you can grow a plant at 7.8. But if we want to talk about the ability of the plant to easily take up nutrients so it can put energy into the things that we want it to put energy into, which is not just like fighting for its survival, but actually like producing cannabinoids and all the different things, that terpenes and esters and all the things that we want as a grower, then let's try and target a good pH range. And I would say probably 6.6 to 7.1 is sort of a pretty suitable range for organics. I like to be high on the higher end of that, just because it reduces heavy metal uptake.
Very good point. And that's, again, something we were kind of discovering about using some of the microbial or, oh my gosh, mycos solutions, mycorrhizal. Mycorrhizal. I'm like microbial, mycorrhizal. Hello. So I kind of keep distracting myself. I'm looking for the questions in chat, and I do have some up here. We were talking about water. Where was I going with that? Oh, well.
All good. I'm peeking at the questions too. When I'm hosting with Brandon, I do the same thing. It gets it's hard to stay in the conversation and keep up with all the comments too. And there's a lot of good comments in here.
pHing. Thank you. So pH is what we were just talking about, and what I wanted to remember, why it is important. You just covered actually why it's really important. I always say, just anecdotally, I always say, check the pH of your like water and stuff, because who knows if it's so like if it can get out of range from what you're used to. Like the town that I live in, there's a couple different water tanks where at different times of the year they'll switch to different wells. Now, if I'm using all of my calculations off of one and they switch to the other and it's wildly different, I could unassumingly kind of be throwing a wrench into the thing. So the pH, the microbes will kind of help buffer the pH. The pH more specifically in the rhizosphere is important. But yeah, I always say just check it to know it, and then adjust if you feel like you need to adjust. And I think you covered the reasons why you would or wouldn't there.
Yeah, thanks for bringing up watering. There's a test you can get called an irrigation suitability test. A lot of labs do it. We work with Logan Labs. You can get it through us. It's not very expensive, and it gives you a really good idea of if your water's okay for gardening. Because water for drinking is very different than water for gardening. Your plant's going to get, quite a bit more water throughout that life cycle. And so you want to make sure that it's clean. So that was the first thing I always do when I move to a new location is I get my water checked and make sure that it's going to work out of the tap for my plants.
And that's good. I mentioned it the last show that we did, but I got the notice from the Water Commission that we've been above the acceptable parts per billion level of arsenic in our water. So interesting, that stuff can compound. And maybe that, kind of leads into the next question. Good to see you, Thomas. He says, do you guys aerate your water before feeding? He's done it in cocoa and peat with great results. Commercially, I just kind of bubbled stuff. In terms of adding oxygen to the water, you're not necessarily adding a ton of oxygen to the water that I'm aware of. I think water temperature is a larger factor in that. But it's a great way to keep the nutrients mixed. And what I did find, and Tad, tell me if I'm crazy, but what I did find from aerating just my plain water before adding, I found that the pH stabilized a little bit sooner compared to not doing it. There would be, so an example is like one night I bring in the water jug, I'll pH it to where I want, I'll come back the next day and it's a little bit higher. But if I aerate it, it tends to stabilize a little bit sooner because ultimately it will stabilize typically, from what I understand, when it hits room temperature, basically. Is that crazy?
It's not crazy. Yes. So a few things I want to add to this. One resource is on the KIS Organics website on the blog post. Brandon Hudson wrote an article on water with metrics that you can go click on and see. And so if you have a Logan water suitability test, you can see some metrics for what range you want to be in on that test, or you can get an analysis done by Brandon. What About Bob has a very good, important comment about water here that I want to highlight. If you can find it.
Is this the one?
No, it's the one on alkalinity.
Okay, I'll go up. Sorry, I was trying to find your page.
Where was I going with this? Okay, so yes, so there is good research horticulturally around dissolved oxygen levels in water and how those relate to water temperature. So I'm fortunate. The house that we moved into has a hot water and a cold water hose, outdoor hose attachment. So I turned off my blue mats. With blue mats, I run them directly through a hose end connector. So I don't have a great way, it's a pressure system. I don't have a great way to add aeration to that. With my current system, I just put it through a water breaker wand, like a dram wand, which will add some aeration and break up the pressure of the water so it's not damaging the soil. Watering wands are the best. If you're going to hand water, you got to get a watering wand. But I can adjust the temperature of that water to get it to a range that's good for me to just walk right into the room and just water my plants. So I don't have to do all that. So that's how I water, which is just
that's awesome.
Unfortunate, right? Yeah. If I had a reservoir going, yes, I would aerate it. And ideally, you would have it a little bit colder probably than your room temps. But it is what it is. So yes, because dissolved oxygen levels will be higher at colder temperatures, but you don't want to go so cold as to shock your plants. So there's definitely a balance there. I did a whole podcast with Les Evans from DRAM where he does a deep dive on dissolved oxygen and water, because that's why your aerating is to increase dissolved oxygen in your water, which has benefits as it pushes the oxygen down into the soil profile. And that's also what happens when we water is we get good gas exchange. So that pushes down oxygen into that profile and pushes out other stuff. And then every time it dries out, you do it again. And so that's why that movement of water through the profile is actually very good for your plants.
Awesome. And I want to follow up real quick too. Our friend from Denmark tap water's coming out at 8.4. Is there something in the organic realm that you would use to just kind of bring that down a little?
So that's where the comment from what about Bob comes into play. That's 3 above that. I think you might have already highlighted it while I was talking. Essentially, it depends. So if your water alkalinity, that's the no, it's 3 above it on my screen at least. It's about alkalinity. Shit. So essentially, what Bob said, and this is correct. So he wrote alkalinity if the water is more important than pH. So if you have RO water, your alkalinity is low. And alkalinity refers to the ability of the water to adjust the pH. So if you have a very high alkalinity, you have to add a lot of solution, a lot of an acid or a lot of a base to adjust that alkalinity. Whereas if your alkalinity is low, and again, don't think of alkalinity as meaning above 7 in pH. We're talking about the ability of the water in terms of to move the pH, that number. So RO water, let's say you have something, there it is. If let's say you have RO that has like 20 ppms in it, there's not much in there. You could add just the tiniest amount of citric acid and your pH is going to drop, right? Or you could aerate it for a long time, your pH is probably going to go up. So in those cases, it's good to buffer it lightly so the water has some mineral content, because water naturally wants to bond with minerals, but you probably don't need to do a huge adjustment to it. The soil will adjust and it won't have a dramatic effect on soil pH. But if you're constantly with water that is 8.4 and has high alkalinity, depending on what's making up that alkalinity, whether it's sodium or calcium or some other cation, it can have a very negative impact on your soil pH overall. And there is research on that.
Excellent answer.
So it's complicated.
Excellent answer. As always, and I always tell people, and you started a few of your answers with this, it depends. It depends should always kind of be somewhere in the answer, because there are a lot of different variables. One that's actually kind of probably pretty constant though, water temp, 68. From what I understand, is kind of the best water to hold the most oxygen. You start getting higher, there's a little bit less. You start getting colder, you can maybe kind of shock the roots. 68, if possible. Do you have a preferred target for water temps?
I probably would just hop online and look it up. Honestly, I do it by feel. Okay. So I think I was going to guess 65, 68. Yeah, you're right around that same range. Yeah. I want it to be like comfortable to the touch, but not cold. It's a very vague way of doing this. So yes, thank you for throwing out an actual number that people could use.
Yes. And I researched that one because I did a video. So that's why I specifically went to 68 and not 65 or 70 round numbers.
Yeah. Just 65 to 70 though, you're probably going to be just fine. But if you want to be exact, Chad gave you the best answer for sure.
Yeah, and again, it's one of those things where you can get a range and still be within reason. This kind of involves water. Fuzzy Bunny had a question here. Says, if you use a product like microbial mass biweekly, are aerated compost teas redundant? I usually use the drench, the KIS. Okay. You're shaking your heads because I don't have an answer.
Oh, I love this. This is a great question. So microbial mass and what Mammoth P was, and some of these other products on the market are specific microbes. And in this case, with microbial mass, you think of like P solubilizing bacteria. But you're also getting other nutrients that are cycling. But the reason we use that one specifically is because it does cycle phosphorus, and available phosphorus is always a challenge in organics. Aerated compost teas also for nutrient cycling, but we're going to get a wide range of microbes, which I really like. And it's more of just a shotgun approach. You're putting out everything you can and seeing what survives, seeing what happens, sort of thing. And so it's sort of just like a diversity wins situation versus targeted microbes in high concentrations that we know have a very specific plant and soil effect. So I don't like to put microbial mass into my compost tea because then those microbes could become just another food source for the other microbes in the tea itself. So I would say, a program like this, I would call aggressive in that it's a little bit more labor on your end and a little more cost, but I think it works really well. I don't do more than 2 compost teas an entire cycle. And like right now I'm not doing any because I've been super lazy, but I love, Brandon really loves doing an aerated compost tea. That's what ACT stands for, right around transplant. And he's had really good luck with it. It's going to give you a little bit of nutrients from the compost. You're not going to get that nitrate or a little bit of nutrients from the microbial mass either. So you are going to get a little bit of nutrients from it. And you're also just getting an increased nutrient cycling. That's the main benefit of compost tea. So if you have a program that works, I am the last person to tell you to change it. So that's the other thing too. Like if you're getting results that you really like and things are happy, like you could start taking one thing out and see if you still get those results. But at the end of the day, that's what we're all striving for. So it sounds like a good program that's working in their environment.
And I like the suggestion too, to slowly do reductive methods to see if that is the one thing that's maybe tipping you over or maybe not necessary. So excellent approach there. You kind of we're touching on the microbes there, and this one kind of, leads into the microbe world. And I know that some prefer it wetter, some prefer it drier. It's all really about a balance. But, dry back and crop steering was kind of a hot topic over the past year or so. But
Yeah.
Does that necessarily apply to living soil or feeding, with top dressing? How would you approach that?
That's a great question, Brandon. So this whole idea of drybacks is really related to this concept of crop steering, which you hear a lot coming out of the hydro world. I feel like is kind of where that started. This idea that we can have targeted stress events because we know that plant stress increases certain physiological responses in the plant, some of which are really beneficial, like increasing, cannabinoids like THC levels. Sometimes your most potent plant will be the one that you threw out on your compost pile at the beginning of the season and forgot about and didn't water. And then you're like, oh my gosh, this thing looks like crap, but it's the best plant. It's the best one to smoke. Or like your run, you have a cycle and things are off. Your plants were never happy. They look like crap, but you're like, this is the best weed I've ever grown. I just didn't get very much of it. So that definitely, there is something to that. Now, do we know as an industry, as growers, how to exactly target these stress events and when the best to do them? I would argue no. I would also argue that we naturally have stress events in our garden. No one grows the perfect plant. Like we're not growing in these university growth chambers with everything perfectly dialed. There's always stuff going wrong in our grows. At least that happens to me at least. So, so I don't personally target drybacks. Now, there are some people that claim good results with allowing the soil to dry out towards the end of the cycle, the very end, right prior to harvest. And I could see some arguments around that as to why that might have some benefit. But when we do a dry back in living soil, we're slowing down microbial activity. So some of those microbes are either going to die or go dormant because they don't have access to moisture. So they're not cycling nutrients. The root hairs can't survive, which we talked about, root hair death. They'll grow back, but that time it takes for them to grow back is time that plant can't take up nutrients as efficiently. So I personally don't really like to try to do drybacks, but again, it's not one of those things that we have exact answers around at this point in time, I feel like.
Right. It's kind of the, is the juice worth the squeeze? And when it comes to, the dry back at the end of the run, that's something that I had always done because I haven't always been in living soil. And there is evidence to support that it can increase cannabinoid production and terpene production. That's something that we see almost kind of universally throughout just agriculture, I guess we'll say. Peppers being a good example. They make more of their oils when drought stress towards the end, and cannabis oil is, well, the freaking trichome heads, so that's what we're after there. But the is the juice worth the squeeze? It's okay, you're going to get a little bit more cannabinoids maybe, but then the detriment to the soil and the microbial populations there, is that going to even out? And I always argue at the home scale, at the hobby level that we're doing it, those things don't make a big difference. Because again, if we get 2 more grams per plant, or we get an extra 1% of cannabinoids, big whoop. But if you're doing that commercially, where 2 grams per plant times 60,000 plants, that makes a huge difference. So yeah, certain stressors I don't think are necessarily overly beneficial to the home grower on the scale. So I'll put that there.
I think if you're going to experiment with it, do it towards the end of the cycle, the flower cycle. Because if you do it too early on, it could also open you up to some other issues with pathogens and things like that, just because the plant is it's dealing with the stress, so it's less immune to those issues. So that's another factor. If you have high botrytis pressure, for example, and all of a sudden the plant's stressed, the plant may be more susceptible to that botrytis.
Okay. Let's see here. I'm just scanning in, guys. If you do have some questions, go ahead and type them into chat. It helps me see them. If you do cap letters question and then type it, I can typically see those a little bit easier. We do have some more kind of queued up here, though.
Sweet.
Yeah, let's see here. How about a chelation question? Zeolite. How about a talk on zeolite for chelation? Now, chelation in a nutshell, I guess, for people who may not be familiar, it just kind of helps certain nutrients get into the plant without being pulled by ions and anions. Is that kind of correct? Basically, it's like blinders for certain nutrients to get into the plant without getting nutrient locked. Sorry.
I've always looked at chelation as a fancy word for bonds with, essentially. So it's a chemistry term. So like, for example, if we talk about something like gypsum, it's calcium sulfate. You have calcium and sulfur that are bonded together, that are chelated together. And chelated nutrients in general are in an ionic form that the plant is better able to take up. So that's how I've always thought of chelation. I need to go back and retake chemistry. Honestly, it's been a while. As far as zeolite goes, I've never really used zeolite. I've heard people use it for like detoxes and like it may bond with certain minerals in our soil and help with uptake of those minerals, or may help make certain minerals less available. Like we talk about things like that I'm more familiar with, like biochar. Biochar will bond with it will chelate with certain heavy metals, but then in a form that the plant really can't access as well, according to the research. So that's how I've always thought of these sorts of inputs, but I've never really used zeolite, so I can't really speak to it, unfortunately.
Okay, and again, that's a good answer. Realistic expectations and not BSing people. That's what I always try to practice and preach. If you don't know the answer, just say it. That's okay. And usually we're able to point you in the direction to actually find the answer, or give you the person to talk to, or where we would personally go look for it. So that's all part of the learning process. And sometimes, as you see for myself, we're doing it in public.
Good question, Derek. I don't know. You stumped me.
You win nothing but our gratitude. Thank you, Derek. Something for us to look at in the future. Troy Bailey here. What's Tad's favorite way to add silica to a living soil grow throughout the whole run? Yeah. Is it going to be a liquid? Is it going to be a powder? What are you doing?
Lots of options. And I know we've talked about silica before, so I won't go into my whole silica thing. I would say some of the simplest ways the simplest way by far is potassium silicate, Eggsil 16H. You can make your own, Dynagrow Protect, or any of these other Silica Blast products on the market. That being said, not fully organic. So if it's approved for use in organic production as a foliar application as a pesticide. But if you want to do a soil drench and you don't want to use any products that are not fully organic, I can totally respect that. If that's the case, then something like diatomaceous earth is a great option for adding silica, or wollastonite, which is calcium silicate. Both of those, there's a lot of good research showing that they will raise silica levels. My least favorite ways would be any of these like silica sands, rock dust, basalt. That form, that crystalline form, which essentially quartz, which is what sand is just not readily available. We don't know how long it's going to take to break down and actually become available. But it's not necessarily like a days to weeks. It's more like a weeks to months to years sort of a thing. So my preference is those other options.
Okay. And yeah, I mentioned the DEG is inorganic DE. When in the past, when I've sprinkled that on top of the soil, it can create kind of a crust or a layer, even if I mix that in gently with my fingers. Do you have any suggestions on maybe how to prevent that, or how to use it properly when in that form?
Yeah, so first off, wear PPE with diatomaceous earth. The stuff and wear eye protection. Like I didn't have eye goggles on, and I put it out because we had dust mites in our feed. Not dust mites, a particular feed mite, because I had a feed store at the time, and so I spread diatomaceous earth everywhere, and then I had to blow all the diatomaceous earth out of the storage container, like our big 40-foot storage container. And so it got up in the air, and I had bloodshot eyes for like 2 days. I didn't even think about my eyes. I wore a respirator because I was thinking about my health, but yeah, it was stupid. So don't be me. Wear protection when you're using this stuff, because it's all these things are dusty and you got to take care of yourself. So yeah, I would just mix a little bit into your soil. Yeah, if you add it just as a layer on the top, it absolutely turns to this like nasty, mucky mess. Because people will add it because they use it for as a pesticide, essentially, for a variety of different things. Because I think it desiccates by making little microscopic cuts. The silica sand in it like cuts the organisms. Which is why it's bad for your eyes. So yeah, if you do that, just do a very light sprinkling and then mix it in, or just mix it in at the beginning of your grow. I actually use wollastonite a lot more than I do diatomaceous earth, but I have seen research that shows DE will become plant available within a grow cycle. So according to Dr. Wendy Zellner, who's the silica expert. So.
Okay. And have you interviewed her on your podcast as well?
Yes. In fact, I've listened to that podcast probably about 5 times now. It's by the one I have to keep going back and listening to, because there's so many gems in there about how wonderful silica is. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to add that to my listening list. And I had a question here. It was from Growing with Kenny. Originally, he was talking about he's got a nitrogen toxicity in his plants, or in one plant, whereas the other plants are still doing good with the same amount of feed. And he was wondering if there was any suggestion other than flushing the soil. So I asked, what are you feeding with? Oh, wrong one. I said, what are you feeding with? And he said he's using New Millennium Nutrients. So that's a liquid synthetic line. And I kind of bring this up because we're talking about water through the soil earlier, nutrient mobility in the soil. And nitrogen is one of those ones, if you do run a lot of water through it, it is fairly mobile in the soil. So in his case, flush probably would be the best answer if nitrogen toxicity was what he was experiencing.
Yeah. So again, questions, are all these plants in the same bed, or are there all these different
pots, individual pots?
Okay.
Yep.
So yeah, if it's in a small pot, you could absolutely just give it a good heavy watering, and that should lower some of the nitrogen levels in that pot, but it's going to flush out some other stuff. So you may end up with other nutrient deficiencies later on. And you don't want to continually flush. So it would just be like a one-time sort of a flush.
Okay. We got Brandon in here on the case.
Yeah.
This is the Brandon we keep alluding to throughout the episode, and you can catch him every other Tuesday with Tad on the KIS Organics channel. But yeah, that's great road to go down.
I would add too, nitrogen is one of the easiest ones I think to diagnose. And again, Brandon's really the pro here, not me. But when I see like real like dark green, like too dark of leaves, and then that curling down across the leaf, so the leaf looks like this instead of being flat. That's kind of usually to me a good sign of nitrogen. Yeah, that curl. So if you're getting that, you just transplanted too. There could be a little bit of transplant shock too going on there. I don't know. I would have to know more. I feel like to really confidently say.
I'm hoping he's going from a smaller pot, like maybe a 2-gallon, into that 5-gallon. Like he was having the toxicity in the 2-gallon, and then by adding it to the 5-gallon, he's hoping it will kind of stabilize or at least spread out into less hot. We'll see. But definitely that comment from Brandon was a good one.
Transplanting is a good option sometimes if you have if you're in a smaller container and you start to see issues. A lot of times that can relate to the water the roots not being able to really access nutrients. But again, the nitrogen being too high is a different. So the things you can flush pretty easily, just so people are aware, would be nitrates, nitrogen, potassium, sodium, and then chloride, which is probably the least of that list in terms of flushable and the amount of water you have to use. But if you're overwatering a lot, what I'd watch for is a nitrogen deficiency or potassium deficiency. If you ever have a flood event too.
And kind of we'll we started with the water topic, and maybe we'll kind of wrap it up with the water topic as well. And I know the EcoWit moisture meter was something that we had talked about originally when I was going to start this run. I didn't pick that up. I didn't change it. Now, as we were discussing the two, though, it works on a different scale than the Blue Mott. The Blue Mott is the tensiometer. That's kind of measuring the soil tension. It has water in the tube. How hard is it being pulled out of that into the soil? But I forget, even though we did have the conversation, how the EcoWit actually measures. Top of your head, do you remember what sort of scale or system it uses to get its calculation?
No, I think I know the Sustainable Village guys that did a whole thing on this. And I promptly forgot it all. Went in one ear and out the other. I have a Blue Lab pulse meter that also works on moisture percentage, and I haven't used it in a little bit. I will have to go back and get an answer for you on that. Off the top of my head, I want to say somewhere in the 30% range, but again, that's totally off the top of my head, and it's been probably 6 months since I've looked at that. So someone should have the answer to that. Yeah, you should be able to find out.
Yeah, it's out there. And again, it's just because there's a difference of how the two systems are measuring this. They'll get you, similar information, but different ways of doing it. Here's a question.
See if people can answer it for us in the comments.
Let's see.
What's his name? Ascending Tom says it uses conductivity. That makes sense because mine's like 2 probe points. So that would make sense. And then Brandon Hudson says 30%. So
there we go.
Close. That was good. Good guess.
You were spot on, actually. Good guess. Like you planned it that way. This one I know you're going to have an answer for. But Little Nugs, it says, how much is a basic soil test? And let's just say Logan Labs. Logan Labs seems to be one that a lot of people use, seems to be a test result that a lot of people can decode for you, or you can find the methods to do it. So Logan Labs, what does a basic soil test cost? And does the basic soil test tell me what I would need to amend going forward?
Yeah, I just want to do a quick shout out to the comments section. Yes, some people are throwing out answers to a lot of the questions, and I love that. Basic soil test. So Logan Labs is going to be a little more expensive. relative to say like a university extension. So like when I lived in King County up north here, I could get a free soil test from the county. You get 3 lifetime ones per property or something. But that test didn't give me a lot of information. Same with like a university test. You don't always get all the information that you would on, say, a Logan test. And there's some really interesting metrics that if you do a full soil test. So it is what it is. If all you can afford is a university test, that's better than nothing. If you can afford a full Logan complete soil test, I think that's someone wrote like $65. That's going to give you the most information. You also have to be able to interpret that information. And oh, there you go. Thank you, Brandon. $60. Okay. And then I think you can add little add-ons for like $5 here and there. But if you want the full soil test with the interpretation from the Brandon Hudson, I think it's $95 through us. We don't charge extra for the soil test. I think we make like $5 a soil test from Logan. They give us a little bit when they're ordered through us. But whatever lab you go with, you have to stick with. So if you order from A&L Lab one test or Midwest Laboratories, and then your next test is from Logan, we can't really compare those results. So for us, because we started with Logan Labs, this all goes back to Steve Solomon in his book, The Intelligent Gardener. I can look at a Logan test and within 10 seconds probably figure out what the limiting factor is, because I've stared at hundreds, if not thousands of them. And they're very easy for us to interpret, and we know all the targets for cannabis with it. But we can also do an A&L test or a Midwest test. It just takes us longer on the analysis side. So you have to figure out what works best for you. And I see someone, Miss K's Garden, asked those house soil test kits, those ones at like Home Depot. Unfortunately, those things are junk. You're probably better off not buying them at all. They're kind of in the same category as those like moisture meters that have the little like wet to dry. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Garbage. I bought numerous times. Yeah. Garbage.
So yeah, they're not going to give you a lot of good information about your test result. And if someone wants to see a Logan test, shoot me an email or shoot Brandon an email, like Brandon at KIS Organics. We can send you a soil test so you can see what you would get on a soil test and what it might look like. Yeah,
perfect. That's a good resource. And I want to let people know that we are here the second Tuesday of every month doing the organic Q&A. This is where we answer your questions. So I'm glad everybody showed up today. But Tad, on those other weeks, what do you got going on? Where can they find you?
Well, we're trying to do more videos, more content this year. That's one of my goals. And Brandon and I are going to be doing videos so this time slot, we will be making videos on our channel and then joining you. Either Brandon and I will join you every Tuesday or every second Tuesday of the month. So if you want to tune in when Chad is not on the show during this time slot, just subscribe to our channel. You'll get an alert. Otherwise, Chad and I will be here once a month this year doing this, and I'm excited about that. Are you going to introduce us to your dog? Like I can see one ear.
This is Chloe. She came in and she's hanging out and she's kind of giving me like the pee-pee dance. So the show's about to end. So we're going to go outside. I picked her up to distract her from wanting to do that. But yeah, Brandon, he's a cool guy. He's full of information, and believe it or not, he has longer hair than me. So you guys will feel just the same, safe, right at home, getting good information. And actually, I'm going to have him on to do a seed collectors episode shortly. So
nice.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Brandon, you guys go over to the KIS Organics channel, subscribe if you already haven't, but check that out. Yeah, before we get out of here, websites, any shout outs, anything, any house cleaning to do, Tad?
Not really. Yeah, I'm looking forward to working with you on this soil mix for your genetics. I'm really excited about that and how that's going. You let me have a sneak peek in the tent, and we talked about tip burn and stuff, but your plants look good. They're growing well. And so I think we're going to get it dialed. I'm really excited for it.
Yeah, I'm stoked. And for me, guys, just the Chad Westport YouTube channel. If you're here, you're here. Just keep it locked Thursday, another Westport University video. You'll be able to catch these custom soil grows coming up very soon, and a whole bunch more. But chadwestport.com is where you can go check out my gear and merch. KISOrganics.com is where you could go and pick up some soil. You can pick up your dry amendments and a lot of other things. That's where you can order your soil test. So thanks for hanging out. Brandon says happy Tuesday, everybody. Have a great one. Next Tuesday, 2 p.m., KIS Organics YouTube channel. Check out Tad and Brandon. But thanks for hanging out today, guys. I hope everybody has a good day. Catch you later. Woohoo!